Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the 2024 Buyer Insights and Intelligence series. We're kicking today off with uncovering the blind spots in the B2B tech buying journey. My name is Kelly Linsnow, and I'm the editor of Demand Gen Report, and I'll also be your moderator today. Before we kick off today's chat, I have a few housekeeping items to run through with you first. So a little bit more about Demand Gen Report. We are an online media company that's geared toward B2B practitioners, and we offer so many resources for you that cover all the latest sales and marketing trends. You can check out our full menu of offerings on our website, which is, of course, demandgenreport.com. And while you're there, I'd encourage you to sign up for our weekly email newsletter so you can get all of our insights and resources directly to your inbox. And then we are also just a few short months away from the B2B Marketing Exchange East. As you might have heard, we rebranded our B2B Sales and Marketing Exchange into B2BMX East, and it includes new dates and a new location. We're headed to Alpharetta, Georgia in the beginning of October, and the team's already hard at work putting together another stellar event. So to learn more about that event and stay in the loop for all agenda updates and even register, you can visit b2bmarketing.exchange/east. And then today's sessions are taking place on the On24 platform. So before we get into things, I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the controls first. So the first item I'd like to draw your attention to is our Q&A widget, which you can access at any time throughout today's discussion to submit your questions. We'll reserve about 10 minutes at the end for the Q&A, so don't be afraid to chime in. And then the second area I want to point out is our resource section. The Inbox Insight team has made a variety of resources available for you, so I encourage you to click around and check it out. Finally, I'd like to point out our Q&A widget, which will allow you to share feedback about the session and the BII series in general. It will launch automatically when we wrap up here, but you're also free to fill it out at any point throughout today's webinar. And then today's session is being recorded, and we'll send over the recording link as soon as we wrap here. So now I would love to welcome our speaker today, Ross Howard. As the product marketing manager at Inbox Insight, Ross specializes in creating strategic engagement solutions for B2B marketers. He enthusiastically discusses how content, data, and buyer behavior align to drive growth for companies. So now that we know for sure we've got an expert on our hands, I'm going to pass things over to Ross to get us going.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be speaking about uncovering the blind spots in the B2B tech buying journey. So when we think about the tech buying journey, selfishly, as revenue marketers, a lot of the time we focus on how we're going to make money from prospects, right? How we're going to move people through the buying funnel or bow tie or flywheel or whatever methodology that you subscribe to. But really what we're trying to understand is how can we speed up the time spent in that funnel so that our sales cycles are faster, our buyers are better armed with information, and that we're generating more pipeline from them. In order to do that, we have to flip over to the perspective of the buyer through the buyer journey and think of it in terms of what are they trying to achieve and how should we be looking at the information that we produce and the demand generation programs that we run in order to benefit both parties, right? We help them find the right solution, we bring them closer to our brand. So today we've got the chart in front of us here, which is this idea of researching through the buyer's journey through a series of stages. These are similar to the funnel stages that we just talked about, but instead from the perspective of that person who's buying, right? There is a problem that they have, they're aware of the problem or not, so they need to be researching to understand it. A solution that they need to consider to see whether or not it best fits their needs, and then brands that they need to choose from. Right? They're not thinking of it as a linear journey necessarily. They're thinking of it as, they have this problem to solve and they have pain, but they're going through these steps, right? They're researching, they're looking at the technical requirements, and then they're shortlisting to make a decision. And what we've seen over the time with intent data is this curve is mostly in the researching and technical phase until, the logistics of making a decision. The challenge is that this is not an easy process. Right? Within an organization, there's multiple decision makers, and within your market, there's multiple accounts which are going through these phases as well. So it's a very non-linear, confusing process for both buyers and sellers to understand what's happening in market at any one time. And what we're going to talk about today is research into what's really happening, and also how you should be basing your processes and triggers at each stage of this to run the best demand generation campaigns you can and see the most conversions. So in order to find out more about how people were behaving, we ran a survey to a series of panelists 803 respondents were really pleased with the sample size, 57% of which were in the US, 43% across Europe, and asked them 43 questions, quite a dense study. They were mainly IT decision makers, but we had different lines of business who held purchasing authority included as well as financial ratifiers within there, all manager and above. So all the data that we're looking at today is people highly involved in the purchase journey. And we'll be breaking it down into 3 sections. So identifying who those decision-making units are and how we can understand those triggers, educating them with content so that they can understand their challenges and the solutions, and building trust with your brand, and then conversion to understand how you can seal the deal, right? So let's start with identify. So identifying the decision-making unit and meeting their needs is vital to growth, is the quote here. It's funny to read it out and quote yourself, but I genuinely believe like we need to start with the persona in mind and map out the people involved in the purchase, because the more that we can enable that buyer, the faster it is that they're likely to close for you, and the more that you can accelerate your demand. So those buying units, across our sample study, 50%, 48% were the ultimate decision maker. And then there were other roles in the process, the second highest being an influencer to that purchase, right? So somebody who's highly involved, they're the person that is determining the need, right, or evaluating the technical requirements. But the takeaway here is that there are multiple people involved in a purchase, and it's not always necessarily obvious, but they are all involved in research and recommending solution providers at 75%. So if somebody is senior within a business and a purchase is happening around them, they've got an opinion. And so we need to be thinking about how do we identify them and bring them into that funnel. This was an interesting stat. How many technology purchases are you involved in per year? Senior tech leaders are buying constantly, right? Over 50, over 10 purchases was 48% of the sample per year. They're constantly evaluating and trying to understand what different solutions are required by the business and give their input. And they're doing it with a ton of other team members involved, right? 32% with 4 to 8 members, 29% with 8 to 12 members. So there are large cohorts of stakeholders all trying to make this decision with your prospects while they're in that purchase journey. So understanding and mapping out the decision unit on an account by account basis or with some patterns in mind is a really powerful way to try and tailor that experience. But it's busy. And they're time poor and have to justify all those spending decisions to widening groups of peers who all have a competing opinion. And so in order to gel those people together, we as demand generation marketers need to think about how to generate trust with all the relevant contacts within that account in order to make that process easier for them. Because even if you enable a champion internally, you have to get through the other 8 to 12 people involved in making that, that purchase decision with you. Next step in terms of identifying is we know the profile of a decision maker now, and we know there are lots of them, but how can you understand your audience with intent data in order to trigger and activate against them? So when we asked the question, what triggers you to research a new solution, we saw that the largest answer was, the new vendor is more feature rich, right? So people are looking around that pain research phase. They're looking for new solutions to solve that pain. When, the pain points that they have at the 51% answer was actually lower than that feature rich product. So I think what people are trying to say is they're looking outside their existing, if you are the incumbent, it's not necessarily land and expand. If you have a feature where there's a gap, you need to be considering like what is going to trigger people to look elsewhere in order to retain. And if you're trying to displace that competitor, you need to be running demand generation programs that focus on that lack as a competitor takeout campaign. In terms of the other largest answer, integrations was interesting. There's more information in the rest of the study, which we'll be pushing soon around that answer. But integration seems to be a big decision at the moment when it comes down to replacement of existing partners. When we think about that curve in the buying journey, when we asked the question, what was the average length of buying process? It was between 1 to 6 months. So if we think of that bell curve as the 1 to 6 month mark, you need to be thinking about the different ways that you can identify people early in that research cycle within the 1 month, so that when they start beginning to look in earnest, that you've delivered multiple content experiences to them, if possible, but useful stats around, where people are spending their time and how long for. But the good news is the rewards are well worth it. When we asked the audience if their budget had increased, or what had happened to their budget, they'd said it had increased. And when we asked them what they expected to happen, they expected it to increase as well. So even with some tough macroeconomic conditions, we're still seeing tech spending being a large component of people's budgets, and also large individual sort of output per purchase. So really strong buying signals from that audience. Okay, so educate. We're onto our middle section. We need to educate buyers across that journey in order to bring them closer to our brand and generate demand within our funnel. So problem awareness is knowing the pain in your organization and what it's costing them, that first bucket of the start of that journey. Solution awareness, when they're looking to understand what the capabilities are that are going to solve their problem, is the middle section of that funnel, the last 3 of the 6 months, let's say. And then the brand awareness piece runs all alongside it, so that they're going to be choosing and trusting you more than they're going to be choosing and trusting the competitors, especially in the shortlisting phase at the end of that journey. But it's worth thinking as a marketer, how are you going to generate engagement within your demand generation programs across these areas? And that is to hook into the emotional need within the buyer's journey at each of those stages. So if I need to understand the pain points in my business and in my role or career personally in solving that pain, the real motivator in the content is fear, right? Either fear of missing out or fear of something going catastrophically wrong and the loss that we are receiving. So we need to be thinking in terms of how are we going to hook the audience, motivating them to understand the problems that they have. And then within solution awareness, we need to be thinking about hope, right? We need to be thinking about solving that problem and creating a brighter future, and discussing in the content what good looks like, so that we can educate the audience around the possible. And in doing so, they're going to start seeing you as a thought leader. And then the brand piece, it's not just about brand in terms of putting your logo in front of people, right? This is about brand to demand. So you need to understand, are you going to be giving information that's valuable, that makes people trust your brand? And in doing so, that's going to increase your chances of conversion further through the funnel. But why do it, right? So 88% of the sample agreed that they trust a brand more if they get value from their content. So buyer education is a key way to show that you can increase trust with a target customer, and in doing so, increase the likelihood that you're going to get selected during this buyer's journey. The good news is, when we ask them, we ask them to agree with the statement or disagree with the statement. It makes me trust a brand more if I get value from their content. 88% agreed. But we also asked them, are you more likely to engage with content if you trust a brand? And they also agreed. So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy or virtuous cycle, where the more engagement you can generate with your content, the more you can educate the audience, the more likely they are to continue to consume content from you and trust you, right? So over time, these demand generation programs should be increasing the value of what they're giving your company. The marketing takeaways from this are potentially, to get tactical for a minute. If the key to starting that cycle is to get a first touch engagement, you want high value content that opens the door with a new prospect. So those first touch opportunities or marketing qualified leads are a way to engage a known audience member and prospect with high value content. You then want to increase the speed of that loop that you're putting people through, right? So you want to do nurture with multi-touch, multi-channel activation, different paid media programs or content syndication programs to touch that audience as many times as you can in order to increase that trust over time through that loop. And that's going to drive better conversions lower down the funnel and across the decision-making unit that we talked about in the last section. So how do you generate that engagement? Well, we asked another important question, which is how hard do you find it? How hard is it to find trustworthy information online? And a large percentage of the audience agreed with that statement. Over a quarter said agree, 16% said strongly agree, which was more than I was expecting. I thought people had this down, but really they're wading through a sea of information in order to get to things that they feel like they can trust. And when we dig into those channels and where they trust them, there are multiple different places. I mean, this is a long list, right? With lots of different places where you can get that information as a buyer, and you have a sea of choices at your disposal. What we need to understand is when we are producing content to market and running programs, we don't want to scatter their attention. We want to make sure that our content is in the right places at the right time in that journey. And so in the research phase, we're seeing a rise in the usage of software comparison websites and business industry news websites and webinars in order to engage and understand the research component. But later in the buyer's journey, you see, some drop off from those steps as you get into more specific information, whereas, independent research analysis stays relatively flat and relatively strong because they're going into that detail from the beginning. So it's really about having content of the right type at the right time during that buyer's journey. Interestingly, I thought podcasts and communities were going to be higher, but actually our hypothesis for this is that consumption pattern is more about self-education and more about habit than it is about explicitly researching a problem at that moment in time. But it's interesting to see that the ways that people are using content is changing. And we now need to have all types of different touch points available to us as marketers to make sure that we're being convincing and educating the audience where they're spending their time. Because they're finding it hard to get trustworthy information online, we asked them what would improve that process. And so when we said, do you agree with this statement? Would you trust content about business challenges and tech solutions more if it came from an impartial third party? It was a resounding yes, as it was an industry subject matter expert or influencer key opinion leader. So what we need to think about in terms of demand generation activation is you can be partnering with these vehicles, right? You can be putting your brand and content in places that are likely to cut through and be more trusted in order to engage that audience and increase the power of that engagement and the likelihood that they trust your brand and are more likely to engage with your salespeople. So the ability to, we're having it directly from the audience themselves. If it's not just coming from you, it's more likely to be trusted. The other interesting side of this is where they spend their time consuming work content. So to dig into social, what we saw was that LinkedIn was the top social media network for works, quite unsurprising. But actually 57% of users said that they consume work content on Facebook and on YouTube, and 46% on Instagram, which is really high engagement off of Google and Meta platforms, which both have robust paid media functionality and B2B targeting functionality if you use the right first and third party intent data. So really strong signals there that you can reach people consuming work content on social with deeper engagements in order to increase that flywheel of touch points against your brand. And when we look at when they do that process, it's all the time, right? It's mostly at work, ironically, pop out my phone and scroll while I'm bored. I'm still working. I'm still consuming work, especially at that senior decision maker level, right? So they are thinking about this all the time, apart from on holiday where they're trying to take a break. Another interesting, stat from the channels piece is 46% of the audience said that they're going straight into ChatGPT or other LLM solutions while researching to digest and summarize information to ask it questions. So, there are various pundits in demand generation which would talk about dark social or word of mouth, people sharing things with each other. Actually, now they have a virtual colleague, right? They have a co-pilot in the AI. It's going to be in their operating system or in their browser soon. And buyers are going to be starting to rely on this information, which is potentially dangerous, right? If it's during the process where they require certain technical detail, what did the bot last read and digest? How good is its algorithm at understanding and reproducing information about your product? Should be something that marketers are thinking about in the new way that people are using this software, and producing transparent, easily accessible information for not just users, but for bots as well, so that your brand positioning can be summarized back to the audience easily and concisely when people are asking questions about this. So brave new world for content creation and for demand gen practitioners. The other side is that if you can get those early touch points against that audience and begin your own nurture journey through your demand generation programs, you're more likely to be top of mind when people are researching. So they're less likely to ask generally what's the best CRM into a bot, right? Because they've already understood what you're offering and your benefits, or the pain points that they have been highlighted by you. So it doesn't change necessarily how we need to act in our programs, but it does expose a growing trend of increasing AI usage across our audience. And then throughout that buyer journey, we want to think about the deep work happening by a buyer, right? They have a large business pain point. I might be, an e-commerce director that's trying to understand how site speed is impacting my commercial performance, and I'm reading all sorts of things about content delivery networks. It's likely that a third of the audience are putting 3 to 9 hours a month into that solution when they're looking to make a big migration or a big selection of a piece of software. And then, it goes up from there. So there are, a deep well of resources online that are not necessarily trusted. But when they do come to consume that, they're selecting a few sources of information, right? 4 to 6 or 7 to 10 sources of information across that research journey. So they're going to places that they know, or they're making a connection with a source of information and continuing to consume it. So you really want to be one of those 10 sources of information, and you really want to be, repeating the interaction that you have with that buyer during those hours of their work week or work month when they are consuming content about the problems and solutions that they're exploring. And so I'm going to frame that as the rule of 10 to try and make it catchy and memorable. Think about the rule of 10. Let's see if it catches on. There are, from the detail we saw earlier in the identify phase, 10 buyers to educate per account on average. They're spending an average of 10 hours a month researching their pain or their solutions, with around 10 touch points across different contact sources. So when you're planning your campaigns and you'll have a target account list, or you have an intent topics list and are bringing to build out what your program looks like, think about widening that decision-making unit and increasing the depth of and frequency of touch points to hit them 10 times across 10 people within that, to try and increase the amount of content consumption. I'm not saying we're all going to get to 10 hours, but I do believe that we need to increase the amount of content time on page depth or downloads, webinar watch time, to try and soak up as much of that attention as we can. So plan to the rule of 10. And then conversion. So how do we maximize our chance of being shortlisted and then winning the deal at the end of the end of this whole process? When we ask the audience how many vendors they consider, 50%, 49%, keep rounding up, said 2 to 4. So you really want to be within that 2 to 4 in the process, because again, they have to check so many different solutions out. Their procurement department, 75% of the audience said procurement require them to get multiple prices. So they're going through a bidding, framework. They have to try and check out different vendors, but they're also doing multiple software products a year, as we saw at the beginning of this. And with each of those software products, they're trying to get 10 sources of information and trying to get 10 hours worth of research done and convince their 10 colleagues. So doing that across multiple solutions is draining their time. And trying to understand, what their options are, they're going to go with the brand that they trust the most. So by increasing those upper and middle funnel touch points and increasing the value of those touch points, you're really going to be able to stand out during this process to make more of an impact in the shortlist. So what can you do about it? Well, the next question we asked was, what level of personalization do you expect when researching a B2B solution? And the resounding answer was a lot, right? Some personalization, 40%, high personalization, 38%, very high personalization, 13%. Now, hand on heart, I don't think many of us can say that we are doing very high levels of personalization to every single buyer. I wish we were. So it really is about analyzing what your processes are in terms of your content and your production, and then how much can you vary that by buyer and across the touch points that you have to give them a unique or nearly unique journey and lead them towards the answers that they are seeking. That might mean increasing levels of personalization based on vertical or based on the industry that that company's in. It may mean exploring more about the job title or requirements or pain points of that audience. Delivering content customized by use case and vertical and persona can be time consuming, but it is becoming more of an expectation from that audience. And from a sales enablement layer or sales intelligence layer, if you have key accounts that you really want to win on a one-to-one process, giving that information to the salesperson and engaging them with content that they can then pass on to the prospect should be one of the ways that you're thinking about enabling them. When we come to scale that out to a one-to-few tier one list or a one-to-many process, the amount of time spent per buyer might go down, but we need to think about dynamic or trigger-oriented ways to give a feeling of something unique and personalized to the audience, however we can. The content that they're expecting at this stage towards the end of their buyer's journey is going to be more around case studies and product sheets. They're looking for the gritty detail at this point in order to convince them that it will solve their problem and that it's going to help them make the right decision. But coming in third was competitor comparison, which we also saw top of the list of where people are going to check out the solutions that they trust during the research process. So over time, we're seeing this move towards people wanting a one-stop shop where they can understand and digest their choices and make decisions about how they're going to solve their pain and what solutions are available in market to do it. When we asked what educational content they would expect from a B2B vendor, one-to-one subject matter expert consultations, the hardest to pull off and deepest part, but luckily normally part of the sales cycle, was 72%. So the buyer values that one-on-one time with your brand. So finding different ways to pull that out and personalize it or turn it into other types of content is going to be a way to engage them further up the funnel with that same value. And so the next highest stat one is thought leadership content. And I would try and think, how can you get that one-on-one subject matter mindset turned into thought leadership content and leading the market at scale? As an example of that, comparison piece and the other types of content, I want to dive slightly into how we do it at work. So at Inbox Insight, we run a platform called Insights for Professionals. It's a publishing ecosystem which has a recommendation engine underneath it, which looks at what the audience is interested in. So we get upper funnel produced in terms of ungated assets where we can understand what people are engaging with from an SEO perspective or from a paid short form perspective and track that information. But we also get that contributed to us by in-market experts. So people who are doing the same job as the customer or much closer to their pain points who are bringing that subject matter expertise. So within your own mix, think about how can you involve influencers or how can you involve people that speak the same language directly to your audience and bring them into a collaborative environment with your content. Because it really increases the amount of depth of valuable knowledge and use cases that you can give, which is good for the algorithm in terms of search, but also gives you more credibility and trust with the audience. So that upper funnel should be around generating trust through influence. The middle of the funnel, we build microsites out essentially where we can understand in depth a subject area. So if somebody wants a one-stop shop environment and is researching their pain, what we want to do is theme that. And that, in a campaign environment, is more like running a hero campaign with an asset which is engaging or backed by research or backed by new findings or trends, and then digging into that and repurposing it across formats. So that might be a webinar like this. It might be a fireside with the developers. It might be different white papers that have been written out about certain pain points. But those mid-funnel environments should really be about depth of solutions. How can you dig into the value that is being created by your product for the organization and the pain that it's solving or the fear of loss that it is forestalling for the customer. And then in that lower funnel space, we use product comparison and shortlisting features, right, to understand those lower funnel buying touch points. When people are comparing products to each other, as we saw, that's the top behavior that we're seeing rise at the moment is people trying to understand what am I going to get, comparing products to each other. Making buyer's guides and making that easier is one of the things that you can do. Now, I know that in certain SaaS organizations have used competitive battle cards for a long time. That's not really what I'm talking about here. It's not necessarily a big checklist of all stuff you're great at and stuff that they're terrible at, right? That's it done badly. I think what we need to look at is really understanding through the help and experience of analysts or through examples of how you've used the software in the past, where you shine, and using that to position yourself distinctly in order to give you better differentiation. And when people are consuming your content around those differentiated points, tracking that so that you can double down on it and convert them faster, move them through that funnel. We then pull all of the data points across these different formats into an AI model called Demand BI, and we use that to understand what people are buying, right, what people are looking at, and understand the intent data signals that we're seeing from our first-party audience, as well as overlaying other third-party signals. And this is not just a humble brag. This is something that you can build in your own CDP or within your CRM to understand what pages of the website are my customers going to, right? Are my prospects going to? What signals am I seeing come through publishers? What signals am I seeing come through my paid media? And try and understand what journeys are happening in front of me. How can I build them into different layers? And then how can I activate off of those layers? The simplest of that being, I'm going to score prospects as they come through. I'm going to aggregate the scores across channels, and I'm going to make triggers to sales to say, this account is showing high intent at the moment. You need to go after them. As an example of that, we then ask the audience, how would you like to be contacted, right? Like, what's going to help with conversion is not annoying them. And what was really interesting, stood out to me, was 19% of the audience said that they would be expected to be contacted when they began reading content online. So there is now almost an understanding within the tech buying community that the way that they engage with content has repercussions, right? They're leaving signals, they know that. They're starting to be contacted by your competitors or by your salespeople as they're doing these things, and it's becoming the norm, right? So making sure that you are reaching out to people proactively as they start this journey is actually helpful, or at least expected. And in terms of how that outreach, the buyer would prefer that outreach happened, is 83% email. So email is still strong in terms of if you do have an engaged audience that you're communicating to, they still prefer to be contacted by email, but there are other formats that they will expect or prefer as well. So phone call, social media, and instant messenger. Our advice would be to mix and match the techniques that you can run with high quality within your organization, because more touch points across multiple channels is more likely to increase that lead follow-up conversion rate. Oof, that was a fast 35 slides. So to summarize, I think we've talked through how to identify, educate, and convert buyers, but really the principle here is using insights to understand their point of view. We have a load of tech professionals out there at the moment in the market. They have money to spend, they have a lot of pain that they are looking to fix, and they have endless vendors that could fix it. So looking at it as a way to, how do you arm that person with the right information and educate them in an easy to access way, and then control your follow-up process, is really about how you can maximize the speed of that demand generation that you're running and convert more leads more quickly. If you'd like to learn more, inboxinsight.com, or you can follow me, Ross Howard, on LinkedIn, and I put stuff out like this all the time.
Awesome, Ross.
Kelly, I think
Thank
we've
you.
got some questions.
Yes, we do. I've been collecting them as they came in, but before I get to those, I would just like to remind our audience once again to please take our little survey before signing off today, because we do use this info to determine what's working and what's not, and your feedback is so important to us. So with that, it is question time. So the first question that I grabbed is, when we're in the middle and want to help buyers figure out what they should be looking for, what's the best kind of content or moves we should be making to steer them toward us?
Yeah, so middle of the process, middle of the funnel, the researching stage is really good to be working on an always-on playbook if you can. A lot of our buying cycles are quarterly. A lot of the ways that we have to work with other teams can be quarterly or annually. But if we think about it in terms of a trigger-oriented buyer's journey, an always-on demand generation campaign where you can understand what content you're putting out to market, how the audience is resonating with that, and then be capturing and nurturing a set number of leads per quarter or month is still a really strong way to run that middle of the funnel, because it gives you actionable data that you can then push into your team. And in terms of for the audience, assets that are about pain or fear of missing out are going to be the strongest ones in that case. Like also tactical how-to guides or actionable advice still performs really well. I have clients that will run things like toolkits or checklists or free packs to give away, and they'll get lots of demand capture engagement, like they'll get lots of downloads and things, but often that's a weaker intent signal than something that is specifically around solving that pain point. So we would really sort of recommend delivering that value. If you then wrap that into a program which is, tracks what type of content they were engaging with and follows up with more of the same, then you're going to see better results.
Perfect. And then the next question I grabbed for you is, can you break down how we can use these buyer signals all the way from start to finish?
Yes, that's a really good question. So, as I said, that if we think of it as that 6-month cycle where it spikes up in research as they get used to the topic area, and then tails off as they get into the detail of what solution, you can sort of map the keywords that are around the pain points that you solve to the beginning of that intent scoring process, and then the more solution-oriented keywords can be used later in the process. So if somebody is searching for more sales meetings, right, or if somebody is engaging with sales enablement content, they are going to be looking at the problem area and thinking about how they can improve their deal flow. If they are looking specifically at customer loyalty software, they know their pain point is customer churn. Okay, they're through that process. So trigger deeper engagements with more technical information to those keywords. Go in with an analyst or a longer piece of long form content. That's going to be more likely to engage because that person's more ready to hear it. If you need to increase, the presence of your brand in the market and increase the number of leads or touch points that you want to get, focusing on those pain point contents to educate people about the problem they have is going to be more compelling. So splitting it by topic areas is one way to do it. Another is looking at your partner's scoring model. So we use a score between 60 to 100. It's very similar to Bombora and ZoomInfo and others, or 6 Sense. These list building platforms or demand generation partners will have an idea of where somebody is in their journey when they give you that score. So having lower scores who are, less ready, being fed one type of content earlier in their process, and very high scores being, given more resources and being pushed towards a salesperson sooner is another way that I've seen it done quite well. In terms of, the channels that you can activate across, I'm more of a believer that more is better than one. So even if somebody has like a score of 99, it doesn't mean that your SDR to just phone them in isolation. You still need to be building out a media mix to convince that person with multiple touches, like we talked about with the increasing trust over time with running your programs for longer.
Perfect. And then we are coming up on time, but I do want to grab one, excuse me, I do want to grab one more question before we sign off for the day. So that one's going to be, could you give us some tips on how buyers might change depending on their industry or the size of their company, and how we could switch up our game to match that?
Yes, yeah. So we actually we can sort of cut the data from this webinar, and we're going to be putting out some more insights soon around that. We saw different answers from the enterprise segment of the audience than the small business segment. We saw different answers per vertical. So it really does depend on that audience and what their needs are. One way that you can do it is by looking at the firmographic data in your CRM and your marketing automation platform to understand what type of content and use cases that you're running. Where are you seeing the most leads by topic area against different types of customers, so that you can understand who actually cares most about what most often within your domain. And then collaborate, bringing customers in who've solved the problem before, not just into your case studies to say that you're brilliant, but also into your thought leadership layer, or collaborating with people who are key opinion leaders in the area who can give you more detail on why the industry reacts that way, right? Give you juicier content details, but specialize it to the people that are within your ideal customer profile, that are in that niche. With an example of an expert, your content's going to fly.
Perfect. And then I lied. I do want to get to one more question. It just came in and it's super good. So we're gonna roll with that one. That one's gonna be, can you dig into how buying teams work together, make decisions, and how can understanding these dynamics influence marketing and sales strategies?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's there's only so much you can learn from the outside of an organization, is the thing that I would warn. Like if you get in a more general sense, like if people are looking for a particular persona, we will work with customers on cost per lead programs or on demand generation activity where they will say, I want VP and above. And that's absolutely fine. That's completely legitimate. But you are leaving out those other 9, 10 people that we're talking about. And so understanding, that the buying center is a group of people who are all, have contradictory information that are trying to come to a decision. It's really about building out a framework of, do you have enough of the right type of people within that company that you're convincing? And are you reaching them across the right touch points in order to influence them? It's not just about going for the boss. The other thing that I would say is, again, more useful, is probably have a look at technographic data. Start thinking about what does that customer already own? Do they already have a competitor in place, or do they have other solutions which are often bought alongside ours, or something that we're used to, so that you can understand what the lay of the land is, and then look at intent data signals around, like, what topic areas are happening in which region. Because because one company has Marketo installed, it doesn't mean that another region in another business unit, depending on their corporate structure, doesn't also have HubSpot, right? Like you can have multiple installs across different regions, and they may be set up differently. So you can predict to a degree the right way to have the conversation, but then when you start doing lead generation activities or demand capture, you can start qualifying that out, right? As you get into your sales or SDR layer, you can start asking more detailed questions around, is this decided at corporate level or field level? Is that, are you split by product line? Are all the decisions made globally? Like, so that, questions like that you can actually add into your campaigns to give you more of an understanding of how to push that account. It generally is more of a problem when you're targeting the enterprise.
All right, perfect. So that was officially the last question I have for you. To our audience, if you submitted questions and we didn't get to them, don't worry, we will send follow-up answers via email. And speaking of email, my team is already hard at work on getting the recording over to your inbox. So we do have another session coming up later today. So I'd like to encourage you all to stay tuned for that, and I'll see you over there. But for now, Ross, thank you again so much. That was super insightful. And again, everyone, thank you so much for attending, and I hope you all take care.
Thanks, guys.